The HOA president said my little library had to go. Not my fence, not my mailbox. A box of free books. The same little library that had been sitting in front of my house for almost 3 years. The one where kids picked up storybooks after school. Where neighbors left novels they'd already finished. Where complete strangers stopped to browse while walking their dogs. According to the HOA, it was now a violation. I had 14 days to remove it, or face fines. At first I thought there had to be some kind of mistake. Then the neighborhood found out, and that's when a simple box of books turned into the biggest HOA fight our street had seen in years. Because the HOA president thought she was ordering one homeowner to remove a structure. What she didn't realize was that she was trying to take away something the entire neighborhood loved. The little library started as a weekend project. A few years earlier, my daughter and I built it together in the garage. Nothing fancy, just a small wooden box mounted on a post near the sidewalk. A glass door, a few shelves, and a simple idea. Take a book. Leave a book. At first, only a handful of people used it. Then word spread. Kids walking home from school would stop and look through the shelves. Parents began donating children's books. Retirees left mystery novels and paperbacks. Someone even started leaving handwritten recommendations inside. Before long, the little library became part of the neighborhood. People didn't just borrow books. They talked. They met neighbors. They shared recommendations. It became one of those small things that made the community feel connected. The best part was seeing how many different people used it. One week there would be children's books. The next week it would be history books, then cookbooks, then novels. The shelves were always changing because neighbors kept contributing. Nobody complained. Nobody considered it a problem. In fact, many residents loved it. Then a new HOA president took over. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She talked about maintaining standards, improving appearances, protecting property values. Most homeowners barely paid attention. We'd heard similar promises before, but over the following months, more violation notices started appearing. A decorative bench, a mailbox, a garden ornament. Little things that had existed for years suddenly became issues. People weren't happy, but most simply complied. Then one afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope from the HOA. The moment I saw the logo, I knew it probably wasn't good news. I opened it standing right there by the curb. According to the letter, my little free library was considered an unauthorized structure. I had 14 days to remove it, or face fines. I actually laughed the first time I read it. Then I read it again, and realized they were serious, a box of free books. That was what the HOA had decided to target. A few days later, a neighbor stopped by to return a novel she'd borrowed. That's when I told her about the notice. Her smile disappeared immediately. She looked at the library, then back at me, and said, "You've got to be kidding." She wasn't the last person to react that way, because once word started spreading through the neighborhood, people had a lot to say about the HOA's newest target. At first, the HOA president probably assumed the issue would disappear on its own. Most HOA violations did. A notice gets sent, the homeowner removes whatever the board doesn't like, and everyone moves on. But this wasn't a fence, or a mailbox, or a paint color. This was a little library that hundreds of people had used over the years. And once residents heard it was being targeted, the reaction was immediate. People started stopping by my house just to talk about it. Dog walkers, parents, retirees, even neighbors from nearby streets. Everyone seemed to have a story connected to that little box of books. One parent told me it had helped her son discover a love of reading. A retired teacher said she donated books every month. Another neighbor laughed and admitted she'd borrowed so many mystery novels from it that she should probably pay overdue fees. The more people talked, the more obvious something became. The library wasn't really mine anymore. It belonged to the neighborhood. Then the photos started appearing. Residents began posting pictures in the community Facebook group. Photos of children picking out books, families standing beside the library, neighbors holding books they discovered there. Some posts received dozens of comments, then hundreds. The HOA president wasn't expecting that, because now the issue wasn't happening quietly, it was happening in public. And people were overwhelmingly taking the library's side. The situation became even worse for the HOA when several residents started digging through old HOA documents. They searched bylaws, meeting minutes, architectural guidelines, everything. What they found only raised more questions. There were rules about sheds, rules about fences, rules about permanent additions, but nobody could find any specific mention of little free libraries. The more residents searched, the more it looked like the HOA president was stretching vague language to justify a decision she'd already made. That discovery spread through the neighborhood fast. Suddenly, people weren't debating whether the library should stay. They were asking whether the HOA even had the authority to demand its removal. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of donating books to the library, neighbors started donating books to me. Boxes of them, bags of them, stacks of them. Every few days, more books appeared on my porch. At one point, I had so many donations that I couldn't fit them all inside the library. The whole thing became almost comical. The HOA wanted fewer books in the neighborhood. The neighborhood responded by producing more books than ever. Meanwhile, the HOA president doubled down. A second letter arrived. This one was more serious. The deadline was approaching. Failure to comply could result in daily fines. That decision backfired immediately, because now the issue wasn't just about books anymore. It was about the HOA threatening fines over a free community resource. Even residents who had never borrowed a book from the library started paying attention. And once they did, many of them didn't like what they saw. The community Facebook page exploded with comments. Homeowners who rarely discussed HOA issues suddenly joined the conversation. The library became the most talked about topic in the neighborhood. Then came the announcement. The next HOA meeting would include discussion of unauthorized structures and community standards. Everyone knew exactly what that meant. The library issue was headed straight to the meeting agenda. Normally, only a handful of homeowners attended HOA meetings. This time felt different. People talked about it for days. Neighbors promised to show up. Parents planned to attend. Retirees planned to attend. Even residents who had never stepped foot inside an HOA meeting said they were coming. And as the meeting date approached, one thing became crystal clear. The HOA president thought she was preparing to discuss a wooden box full of books. What she was actually about to face was an entire neighborhood that had decided those books were worth defending. The HOA meeting room was already packed when I arrived. Not crowded, packed. Every chair was taken. People were standing along the walls. Others were gathered outside the doorway, trying to hear what was happening inside. I had never seen attendance like this before. Neither had most of the board. The HOA president certainly hadn't. The moment she walked into the room, she looked surprised, then concerned, because this wasn't the usual handful of homeowners. This was parents, teachers, retirees, families, people who rarely attended HOA meetings, and many of them were carrying books. The meeting started normally enough. Financial updates, maintenance reports, routine HOA business. Then the little library issue appeared on the agenda. The room immediately became quiet. The HOA president stood and explained her position. She argued that the library was an unauthorized structure. She talked about consistency, community standards, enforcement responsibilities, the usual HOA language. People listened politely. Then a hand went up. A retired elementary school teacher named Martha stood. Most of the neighborhood knew her. She had spent 30 years teaching children to read. Martha looked directly at the board. Then she asked a simple question. How many complaints did you receive about the library? The HOA president paused, then admitted there had been none. Not one. The room shifted. People exchanged glances. Martha nodded and sat down. Then another resident stood, a father of 3. He explained how his children borrowed books from the library every week. A grandmother stood next. She described how she donated books after her husband passed away because she wanted them to continue being enjoyed by others. Then another neighbor spoke, and another, and another, one after another. Then came the moment that changed everything. A quiet teenage girl stood from the second row. Most people recognized her. She rarely spoke at HOA meetings because she had never attended one before. She held a worn paperback in her hands. Then she explained that she had found the book in the little library 3 years earlier. It had become her favorite book. That book had led her to read more, then more, then more. Now she was preparing to apply for college. The room became completely silent. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. Then she held up the book and said, "I wouldn't even be standing here tonight if someone hadn't put this in that little library." For several seconds, nobody said a word. Then the applause started, slowly at first, then louder and louder. People stood, parents, neighbors, retirees, almost the entire room. The HOA president looked around and realized what everyone else already knew. The argument was over, not because anyone had won a technical debate, but because the room had reached the same conclusion. The little library had become part of the neighborhood, and nobody wanted to lose it. A few minutes later, after a brief discussion among board members, the announcement came. The violation would be withdrawn. The fines would be canceled. The little free library could stay. The room erupted. People cheered. Others laughed. Some simply smiled and shook their heads. As residents began leaving the meeting, carrying books under their arms and talking excitedly in the parking lot, one thing was obvious. The HOA president thought she was fighting a wooden box. Instead, she had picked a fight with an entire neighborhood's love of reading, and that was a battle she was never going to win. The funny thing is, once the HOA dropped the violation, the little library became more popular than ever. Not because people were trying to make a statement, at least not officially, but after everything that happened, residents seemed to appreciate it more. The very next week, the shelves were completely full. Children's books, mystery novels, cookbooks, history books. There were more donations than I had ever seen before. At one point, neighbors were dropping off books faster than people could borrow them. The library became a destination. People walking their dogs would stop and browse. Parents brought their children over after school. Visitors from nearby neighborhoods started showing up after hearing about the story. What had started as a simple weekend project years earlier had become something much bigger. And the best part? It wasn't just about books anymore. The library gave people a reason to stop, to talk, to meet neighbors they might otherwise never know. In a world where most people hurry past each other, that little wooden box somehow managed to slow things down. A few months later, something unexpected happened. Another little free library appeared on the opposite side of the neighborhood. Then another, then another. Residents who had watched the whole controversy unfold decided they wanted one too. The HOA president had tried to remove a library. Instead, she accidentally inspired the creation of several more. And that's probably the most ironic part of the story. The goal had been to eliminate one small library. The result was an entire network of them. Even years later, people still talk about that meeting. Not because of the HOA, not because of the argument, but because it reminded everyone how much a community can accomplish when people care about the same thing. As for the original library, it's still there. The paint has been refreshed a few times. The shelves have been repaired. Thousands of books have passed through it. And every now and then, I'll walk outside and see a child standing there, carefully choosing a book to take home. Every time that happens, I think back to the day the HOA tried to remove it, because they looked at it and saw a violation. The neighborhood looked at it and saw something entirely different, a place where stories were shared, where neighbors connected, and where a simple wooden box proved that sometimes the smallest things can bring people together the most. The HOA president wanted fewer libraries. Instead, She accidentally created a neighborhood full of readers. And that's a much better ending than anyone could have written.